Question? Yeah.
Question. You've shown that there is continuous appearance of cheaters in the culture of purely
Altruistic.
Can you show me this slide?
Sure. So the question so far is, go.
The question is, for how long did this experiment?
That experiment lasted almost 1 month. And in fact, we've done it for long.
Frequency of cheaters is actually constant.
Relatively so. Relatively so.
Regarding evolutionary strategy.
Yeah, so the question is, in that experiment where we started off with 100% altruists and then looked to see if naturally the cheaters popped up, and whether or not when you have both those types, it could be known as what's called an evolutionary stable strategy. It's basically an evolutionary mathematical technique where you predict the frequency of both types in the population over long periods of time. And the answer is yes. You could do an ESS, you could do a model like an ESS model like that very easily. But we haven't done that yet. You could take the salmonella case and modify a model you did with E. coli by changing the costs and benefits to see what would happen. Yes, we haven't done that yet either, but you could. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
I just wonder whether it is possible to make one additional experiment and to try to find whether there is conditions in the number of cells between E. coli and salmonella. That means that if you put smaller number of cells of salmonella and then raise the number to see whether there is a critical mass of cells.
Yeah, so the question was, can we run kind of follow-up experiments where we change the initial population sizes of the cells, because it's possible that there are these mechanisms that microbes have where they can actually kind of census what's around them, a kind of quorum sensing thing where they can figure out how many other cells are around them. So it might be that if you ran the same experiment that we ran, and you even started them at the same frequency, but started with really low numbers, you might get a different result because simply the small number, absolute number of altruists or selfish types might affect the results. You could do that experiment. We kept the population size per se constant across our experiments, but you could certainly run a follow-up experiment where you change that. And I guess what you would expect would depend on sort of if you were doing it with E. coli and salmonella, you'd kind of have to know who's good at sensing, doing the sensing of how many cells are around, whether E. coli is particularly good at that or salmonella is particularly good at that, or they're both good at that. Because I think your prediction would vary depending upon which of those was the case. But you could do the experiment. We haven't yet.
Okay, just one question.
Yeah.
They're sending.
Oh, yeah.
So salmonella is manipulating the selfish E. coli.
It's possible.
Possible,
Yeah.
But it's not turning this E. coli to altruist actually. It's more like harvesting or milking, or I don't know how to express it.
Yes. Right. So the question is, even in the case where we were left with the possibility that salmonella was using this type 6 system and poking holes and getting the selfish type to be altruists, essentially the question is, what do you call that? Because it's not altruism in the sense of the altruism that we're seeing in E. coli altruists, right? They naturally secrete out this substance. Now you've got a system where you're essentially being deceptively manipulated into doing something that you would not do under any normal circumstances. The reason I didn't use some other word is I completely understand the question, and I don't really know I don't really know that we have a term for that. It's like a parasitic manipulation that produces altruism in something else. It's more than just being a parasite, because being a parasite means just sort of sucking onto whatever you can get from your host, but what they're doing is they're even doing more. They're getting the host to essentially overproduce something that's particularly good for them. So there might be some terminology in the disease literature, but I'm not quite sure what it is. But I understand it's not the same kind of altruism, but it has the same effect. Right.
In common language, we call this stealing.
But stealing is, I mean, it's certainly...
Bring people into altruists. You could also say... I would say domesticating or something.
Domesticating is a good term. Domesticating is a good term. The only thing about domesticating is it tends to imply that there's been an evolutionary change in the domesticated species, and it's not like these selfish, the same selfish E. coli, if you took their descendants and you put them with someone who wasn't poking holes in them, they wouldn't drip this stuff out. Right? It's only when they're in the presence of, so it's something to do with manipulation, but I'm not quite sure exactly what the right word is.
Just a small question. What's the evolutionary benefit of having 10 or 12.5% of cheaters in the population of E. coli?
Right, so what's the evolutionary benefit of having 10 or 12.5%? If you ask the question with respect to the E. coli population, the answer is there isn't any. It's not as if, it's not as if you could, if you could hypothetically ask what's the optimal combination for population growth. That has nothing to do with when you think about it from a strategic perspective. From a strategic perspective, the selfish types don't have to pay any costs, and they can get protected from others. And so they will increase in frequency up until the point where if they get too high a frequency, then they end up knocking off too many of the types that would help them. So you can't go higher than that, and if you go lower than that, it pays to have more cheaters around. So what I'm trying to say is, when you ask what's the benefit of having that combination, I would say there is no benefit at the population level. You simply have to ask, what do the costs and benefits predict in terms of the combination of types that you expect in your system? If that doesn't answer completely, we can talk about that maybe during the break, because it's a little bit of a more complicated answer, and I don't know that.
And just a short type of this in psychology, we see that a society can support up to maybe 5% of psychopaths. It's just a load that society can carry. If there's more than that, they take more from the society, and everything starts to crumble, and it's not supportive anymore. It's just like a parasite load that we can work with. The group. Yeah,
you could think of the cheaters as parasites in the sense that they produce nothing that helps the group, and they themselves are protected. And so, there's no, like Igor was saying, there's no evolutionary benefit to the population to having parasites around. It's just that the evolutionary forces will favor parasites up to some frequency, and that frequency is always going to be the frequency at which, if you go above that and you're a parasite, you end up hurting your hosts more than you do otherwise. We can talk more about that.